Sandra burst through the door, with tears streaming down her cheeks. She stumbled into her home, her cries piercing the stillness of the evening. It felt as if the very foundation of her life was crumbling beneath her feet, leaving her adrift and helpless. She had just returned from the hospital, where the doctor had confirmed the news that would forever change her life. She was pregnant. She wasn't crying because she didn't know the father of her child, but because she wasn't sure of his reaction. Sandra, a tall, elegant, and beautiful woman whose face shone bright like the sun, had a radiant smile that could light up the darkest room. Sandra had always believed in the power of love, yet, despite her parents' stern disapproval of Christopher, she had chosen to follow her heart. Coming from a middle-class family, her parents had provided her with a good education and a comfortable life. But the only problem was that they were pastors, and pastors from Africa. In their eyes, a child born out of wedlock was a scandal, a grave sin, and a disgrace that would shatter their carefully maintained reputation. Their strict adherence to faith left no room for mistakes, and Sandra felt the weight of their expectations pressing down on her. Sandra's tears weren't solely for Christopher. They also flowed from the fear of what her parents might do if they found out she was pregnant. It had barely been 30 minutes since Sandra retreated to her room when her close friend Cynthia, who had been her close friend since school, entered. Seeing Sandra distressed, Cynthia immediately asked, "Babe, what's wrong? Why are you crying?" With a trembling voice, Sandra confessed, "Cynthia, I'm pregnant." Cynthia's eyes widened in shock as she replied, "Didn't you use the protection I told you about?" "I did, I really did," Sandra insisted. "But Chris said he wanted to feel everything, that the protection will ruin the experience. He wanted to know me completely." "And you let him?" Cynthia asked, her tone incredulous. "Please, I need your support, not your judgment," Sandra cried. "I'm sorry, but have you told Chris yet?" Cynthia inquired. "Not yet. I came straight home from the hospital. I couldn't stop crying," Sandra admitted. "Let's go to Christopher's place and tell him. We can figure out what to do next," Cynthia suggested. "But first, stop crying and freshen up. You look a mess," she added gently. They stood at Christopher's door a few minutes later, knocking nervously. When a woman answered, Sandra's heart dropped. The woman was wearing Holy Chris' long black shirt. "I'm sorry, who are you looking for?" she asked. Words failed Sandra, and she started crying all over again. Chris came out to know why the lady was taking so long and saw Sandra and Cynthia standing in front of the door. "What are you two doing here?" he asked, irritation evident in his voice. "We came to inform you that your phone has led to a positive outcome," Cynthia said with a hint of sarcasm. "What nonsense are you talking about?" Chris asked. "I'm pregnant. I just got back from the hospital and the doctor confirmed it," Sandra said, tears streaming down her face like a river. "Darling, just go inside and let me deal with this situation," Chris urged, his voice low but firm. "You know I've told you about the girls who keep showing up, claiming I'm the father of their children because of the rumors surrounding me. It all started with that contract I won. Now, it seems like every desperate woman is trying to get a piece of me, and I feel this one is no different." With a dismissive wave, he gestured toward the lady, who huffed in annoyance before retreating into the house. Sandra and Cynthia stood frozen, shocked by what they had just heard. Chris turned to Sandra, his gaze intense. "I don't know what you're thinking, but all I know is that I need you to terminate this pregnancy. I'm not ready to be a father." Sandra stared at him, speechless. Chris pressed on. "If I weren't the first man you were with, I wouldn't even be having this conversation. Please just go and take care of it. I'll give you the money for it." "Christopher, you promised to marry me. You swore you loved me more than anything and that you couldn't live without me. You begged me to sleep with you, even when I insisted on using protection. You told me to trust you, and now you're saying this? You know my family's reputation was part of why I hesitated, but you assured me you'd support me. Sandra's voice broke as tears streamed down her cheeks. Those were just empty promises. Don't you realize that men will say anything to get what they want? Chris replied dismissively. Please leave my house now. I'll send you the money tomorrow, or wait here. He went inside and returned with a stack of 50,000 naira notes. Take this and do what you need to do, he said, extending his hand towards Sandra. You're a heartless man, Cynthia exclaimed, unable to believe her friend was involved with someone like him. Sandra stood there, stunned, as Chris confirmed everything Cynthia had warned her about since she started dating him. Cynthia had always warned Sandra about Christopher, telling her she didn't like him and didn't think he was a good man. Get out of my house. I won't let you two come here and disrespect me like this. Leave now or I might lose my temper, Chris shouted. Cynthia grabbed Sandra's hand tightly and they left his house. Weeks later, Sandra lay in her room, deep in sleep. She had been doing her best to maintain a facade of normalcy while still living with her parents. The thought of revealing her pregnancy filled her with dread. She had no idea how they would react. That day, however, she slept for hours, her body seemingly urging her to confess. When her mother entered the room, she gently shook her awake, concerned about her prolonged slumber as it was already 4 p.m. I'm fine, mommy, just feeling a bit weak, Sandra replied, forcing a smile to reassure her mother. You don't look fine at all. You seem bloated. Your breast and your body looks different. Wait a second. Sandra, are you pregnant? Her mother inquired, her expression shifting to one of alarm. In that moment, Sandra wished the ground would open and swallow her. The look on her mother's face was unbearable. Mom, I'm not. Please don't worry, she said quickly. Let's just go to the hospital to be sure. I want to confirm that my baby is still healthy, her mother insisted. Reluctantly, Sandra got ready and accompanied her mother to the hospital. As they approached the doctor's office, Sandra suddenly froze, unable to take another step. What's wrong, Sandra? Why did you stop? Her mother asked, puzzled. Mom, I'm really sorry, but I have to tell you, I'm pregnant, she stammered, her heart racing. What? You're what? Her mother exclaimed, her voice rising in shock. Yes, Mom, I am. I didn't know how to tell you and Dad, so I lied, Sandra admitted, her voice trembling. And how long have you known this? Her mother demanded, her anger evident. Let's just go home before I make a scene here, her mother said, turning on her heel and storming out. Mr. and Mrs. Johnson were pastors of Christ Only Solution Church, with her father the general overseer, frequently delivering sermons against unwanted pregnancies. He often warned his congregation about the dangers of young girls becoming pregnant outside of marriage. One Sunday, during a Bible study, a young woman posed a challenging question to Mr. Johnson. Daddy G.O., what if your daughter were to get pregnant out of wedlock? What would you do? Mr. Johnson confidently replied, my daughter would never do such a thing. She's a child of God and understands the responsibilities that come with it. However, if she were to become pregnant out of wedlock, she will no longer be my child. His words were meant to inspire the youth present, but now he found himself grappling with a similar situation. Tears welled in his eyes as he gazed at Sandra, who knelt before her parents in their living room. What have I done wrong? Did I fail as a parent? Why would you choose to disgrace this family? Her father questioned. How many people know about this pregnancy? He asked. No one, just the father and Cynthia, Sandra replied. Who is the father of your child and what did he say when you told him? Her mother inquired. Mommy, it's Christopher and he suggested I have an abortion. God forbid, her mother exclaimed. Turning to Sandra, her father demanded, what are you waiting for? Why haven't you terminated this pregnancy? Daddy, you want me to have an abortion? I can't believe you would ask that, Sandra responded, her disbelief evident. Since you didn't listen to us when we warned you about that boy, I stand with him. Since he doesn't want to marry you, it's best you terminate the pregnancy or you will no longer be my daughter, her father declared firmly. Both Sandra and her mother turned to him in shock. I'm truly sorry, Dad, but I will not abort this baby. I don't want you to disown me, but I cannot do what you're asking. Honey, what are you talking about? Why would you even consider an abortion? The wife asked, her expression still one of disbelief. Listen, woman, I don't want to hear another word from you. If you speak again, you will join her, Mr. Johnson warned sharply. Since you've made your choice, I hereby disown you as my child. No child of mine will bring such disgrace to this family. Get out of my house and make sure you leave this town for good. If anyone finds out you're pregnant, I won't just end your life. I will ensure you suffer for carrying that illegitimate child. By the time I return, I expect you to be gone, Mr. Johnson declared, rising and storming out. Mommy, please help me plead with Dad. I have nowhere to go. I don't know who to turn to. Please, Mommy, help me talk to Daddy, Sandra sobbed. I'm sorry, my dear, but there's nothing I can do. You heard your father, or do you want him to throw me out too? Overwhelmed, Sandra collapsed to the floor, crying uncontrollably. After a while, she gathered herself, went to her room, and packed a few things, knowing she had no idea where to go and wanting to keep her load light. Once she finished packing, she headed to Christopher's house. Upon arrival, she recounted the ordeal with her parents. Christopher, who had been lounging on the couch, suddenly stood up and said, I told you to terminate that pregnancy. That is the only way I'll take you back. Who gets pregnant these days? You clearly aren't thinking straight, which is why you ended up in this situation. If you refuse to get rid of it, then please leave my house and don't come back. Sandra felt as if her entire world was collapsing. She sat there, feeling numb, tears streaming down her cheeks, unsure of what to say next. Am I not talking to you? What is your decision? Are you keeping that thing? Or will you take my advice and abort it so we can continue from where we stopped? Christopher asked. I'm keeping this baby, Chris. You promised to love me and said you would do anything for me. This is our child, Sandra exclaimed, tears streaming down her face. Without hesitation, Christopher pulled Sandra off the couch and forcefully pushed her out of his house. She cried and begged him to reconsider, reminding him that she had nowhere to go and no one to turn to. But Chris ignored her desperate pleas, shoving her away again when she tried to approach the door. Everything felt real to Sandra, as if she were trapped in a movie. How could this be the same man who had once promised her the world? The betrayer cut deep, and she allowed her tears to flow freely. Just as she stood outside Chris' door, the skies opened up and heavy rain began to pour, soaking her to the bone and sending chills through her body. With a heavy heart, she turned and walked away from the house. Seeking refuge, she found a nearby shelter and fell asleep there. The following morning, she boarded a bus heading to a distant town, far away as her father had cautioned her. She didn't want to bring further shame to her family, and that thought comforted her as she settled into the bus, heading toward an unknown destination. When they finally reached the last stop, the driver announced it was the end of the line. Sandra, the only passenger left, stepped off and began to wonder. After some time, she stumbled upon a small abandoned building. She entered, surveyed the space, and began to organize her belongings within its walls. A few weeks after she arrived at that town, every day she kept going out and she won't return until she discovered something new about the town. She kept doing this, and when the last money she had on her was almost finished, she decided to start hawking water on the streets. One day, her regular customer, who was a tall, handsome, and well-built man, came to buy water from her, but she was lost in her thoughts. He spoke to her until he realized she wasn't paying attention, then gently tapped her shoulder. Startled, Sandra snapped back to reality and asked, "What? I'm sorry, what did you say?" Concerned, he inquired if she was okay, but tears began to flow from Sandra's eyes. For days, her body had been aching, yet she couldn't afford going to the hospital. She hesitated but finally admitted, "My whole body hurts." "Have you taken any medication?" he asked, his concern evident. I can't afford a hospital visit," Sandra replied. "I understand. Would you like me to take you to the hospital?" he offered again. "That is very kind of you, But no, thank you. I'll manage, she responded politely. It's no trouble at all. You clearly need help, he insisted. Conflicted but grateful, Sandra decided to accept his offer and followed him to the hospital. After some tests, the doctor entered and said, I assume you are aware of your condition, so we need to register you for antenatal care. The man looked surprised but maintained his composure, pretending to understand. The doctor then prescribed medication and urged them to register for antenatal care before leaving, explaining that the baby was growing quickly and required proper care and attention. They expressed their gratitude to the doctor and exited the hospital. Instead of returning to sell her water, Sandra opted to head home and get some rest. When she shared her decision with the man, he looked at her curiously and asked, Could you tell me why you didn't mention your pregnancy? Tears began to fill Sandra's eyes. It's a long story, she replied softly. I'm here to listen if you want to talk about it. By the way, I'm Michael, he said, extending his hand for a handshake. Sandra, she responded, reaching out to shake his hand. Upon arriving at Sandra's home, Michael took in his surroundings. He had heard about the abandoned building, but was surprised to find anyone, especially a woman, living there. Once they were settled, Sandra began to share her story, recounting everything, from Christopher to her parents. Michael listened intently, feeling a deep sense of compassion for her. So you've been living here all this time? He asked. Yes, Sandra replied, tears streaming down her face. My dad threatened to hurt me if I ever returned to our town, and he said he would make sure I wouldn't survive if anyone recognized me. That's incredibly cruel of a parent, Michael said. But don't worry, if you don't mind, you can come and stay with me. My place isn't far and I live in a one-room apartment. If you'll be comfortable staying with me, I don't mind accommodating you. And do not worry, you'll be safe, he assured her. Thank you so much. God bless you. I don't really have a choice. It's been a nightmare being here alone, with no help and always on alert, Sandra said, her voice trembling. Michael took her to his home, helped her settle in, prepared a meal for her, and after she took a bath, she fell asleep, feeling a sense of relief. They continued to live together, with Sandra handling little household tasks, while Michael supported her, caring for her as a devoted partner would. They engaged in conversations, made plans, and even attended events together. Although some people speculated that they were a couple, they remained true to themselves. A few months later, one morning, Sandra began her usual routine. Following Michael's advice, she had stopped selling her water and food items, anticipating the arrival of their baby any moment. That morning, as Sandra prepared for her bath, she felt some discomfort but chose to push through. After her shower, her water broke and she cried out in alarm. Michael rushed in, quickly gathered the baby clothes they had purchased and hurried Sandra to the hospital. Minutes after Sandra was taken into the labor ward, the doctor emerged and inquired about her husband. Michael approached and the doctor asked, "Why haven't you been intimate with your wife?" He explained that Sandra's tightness could complicate the delivery and it might take time and a miracle for her to give birth without an operation. Overwhelmed, Michael placed his hand on his head, tears streaming down his face as he began to pray. Hours later, a nurse came out with the joyful news that Sandra had given birth to a healthy baby boy. Overcome with excitement, Michael embraced the nurse and began to dance with joy. He rushed into the ward, but the nurse gently reminded him to allow them some time to clean up Sandra and the baby. Once they were ready, Michael hurried in, wrapping his arms around Sandra and kissing her forehead. She looked exhausted but happy to see him. The next day, Sandra was discharged and Michael took her and their newborn home. Friends and customers visited, bringing gifts and well wishes. Everyone celebrated their joy, yet the nature of their relationship remained a mystery to all. Michael stayed true to his word and never laid a finger on Sandra. He devoted himself to caring for her and her baby, ensuring they had everything they needed, treating them as if they were his own, despite his job not providing enough financial support. 5 months after baby Josh's arrival, Sandra resumed selling water. She always had Josh with her at her little kiosk. One day, while she was there with him, a man approached to buy some water. Upon seeing baby Josh, he asked if he could hold him, and Sandra agreed. As he cradled the baby, he exclaimed, "What a handsome boy! May I take a picture of him?" Sandra consented, and after snapping a few photos, the man departed. Later that evening, Sandra shared the encounter with Michael, who reassured her that it was nothing to worry about, suggesting the man admired how adorable and chubby baby Josh was. They brushed it off and went to bed that night. 3 weeks later, the man returned, but this time he brought along some colleagues. Sandra felt a twinge of fear as they approached her kiosk, but the man quickly calmed her, assuring her that she was safe and that they had good news. He explained, "Remember when I asked to take pictures of your baby? I submitted those photos for the Golden Baby competition, and I'm thrilled to inform you that your baby Josh has won." Sandra was taken aback. "Could you tell me more about this competition?" she asked. The man continued, "As the winner, your baby is entitled to a prize of $30 million with the potential for more if the contract is extended. His image will be featured on various products and billboards, and he will have opportunities to travel abroad to meet our international partners. Additionally, you and your family will be provided with a duplex and a car." Sandra was in disbelief at the news she had just received. Joyful tears streamed down her cheeks as one of the team members presented her with a document, urging her to review and sign it, and then pass it to her husband for his signature as well. They handed her their company card, instructing her to reach out once everything was finalized. Eager to celebrate, Sandra offered them water and invited them to stay for a meal, but they politely declined, citing the need to return to the office. As soon as they departed, Sandra locked up her kiosk and hurried home, dancing and singing praises to God. When Michael returned, she excitedly shared the news. After reviewing the document, Michael joined in her celebration, but then paused to ask who would sign as her husband since they weren't married. In response, Sandra stood up, kissed him softly, looked deeply into his eyes, and declared, "I just kissed my husband." Michael beamed with joy, and before the night was over, they shared an intimate moment for the first time since Sandra had moved in with him. The anticipation for the next day was palpable as they both buzzed with excitement. They visited the company the following morning, introducing themselves to the team members. To their delight, they were taken directly to their new home and presented with a beautiful car. The transformation of Sandra and Michael was evident within the week. They took photos of their son, Josh, and soon, baby products featuring his face were everywhere, even on billboards. Various TV stations began reaching out for interviews with the parents of the new celebrity baby. During one of these interviews, Christopher happened to be watching the news. When he spotted Sandra, disbelief washed over him. He shouted, "That's my son! That is my son! I knew he would be extraordinary." A month later, Christopher arrived at Sandra's home, accompanied by police officers, demanding their arrest for allegedly stealing his son. Sandra was taken aback, still reeling from the shock of seeing Christopher, and even more stunned by his accusations. The police apprehended Sandra and Michael, escorting them to the station, but their stay was brief. A series of calls from the company led to their swift release. Christopher was displeased with their freedom and decided to take legal action. The media quickly picked up the story, igniting public curiosity about the paternity of the celebrity child. In response, Christopher began granting interviews to various television stations, making a series of damaging allegations against Sandra. 2 weeks later, during the first court session, Sandra was summoned to the witness stand. The lawyer asked her to clarify her assertion that Michael was the father, despite DNA results indicating Christopher as the father. With a trembling voice, Sandra shared her harrowing experience of the abuse she suffered and how she had been forced out of Christopher's home, and also how Christopher pressured her to terminate her pregnancy. Shouts filled the courtroom as the revelation of Christopher's demand echoed through the air. She continued, detailing her journey from her hometown to the place where she met Michael, who had cared for both her and the baby. She emphasized that Michael had respected her boundaries until recently, even suggesting that the doctor who delivered her child could confirm her story. After hearing the testimonies from both Sandra and Christopher, the judge decided to adjourn the case, issuing a restraining order against Christopher and prohibiting Michael from being with Sandra until a ruling was made. Sandra was granted custody of the baby as she was still nursing him. The news spread rapidly, igniting conversations across the country. When Sandra's father learned of the situation, he was deeply troubled. As he prepared to preach at church the following Sunday, he noticed the congregation's uneasy glances. Overwhelmed, he asked the assistant pastor to take over the service that day. The following week, the courtroom buzzed in anticipation as everyone gathered for the final hearing. As the judge entered, a hush fell over the room, and all rose in respect. One seated inhaled deeply, preparing to deliver his verdict. After reviewing the evidence and listening to both the defendant and the plaintiff, along with the testimonies of the witnesses, it is clear that a man can father a child without being the biological parent, as demonstrated by Christopher. Therefore, I declare my verdict. Mr. Michael Tony is the father of baby Josh, and Miss Sandra Johnson is the child's mother. Mr. Christopher James is ordered to pay a fine of 1 million naira for damages inflicted upon Sandra and Michael. This is my ruling. The crowd erupted into applause and cheers, unable to contain their excitement even before the judge finished speaking. Sandra rushed to Michael, kissing him as tears of joy streamed down their faces. Meanwhile, Christopher, filled with rage, stormed out of the courtroom. Media personnel bombarded him with questions, but he shoved past them, determined to escape. 3 months later, on a bright Saturday morning, Sandra and Michael were in their cozy living room, joyfully playing with little Josh, when a knock echoed through the house. Michael opened the door to find a man and a woman who introduced themselves as Sandra's parents. Upon hearing her name, Sandra emerged, only to find her parents standing there. Anger surged within her, and she retreated inside, instructing Michael not to let them in. However, Michael urged her to at least hear them out. After a moment of contemplation, she reluctantly took a seat, her heart racing. Her father, overwhelmed with emotion, knelt before her, tears streaming down his face, unable to utter a word. Her mother joined him in sorrow, and soon Sandra also found herself crying. They pleaded for her forgiveness and a chance to reconcile, but Sandra, unable to face them or let go of the past, stood up and walked away, her heart heavy with unresolved pain. The pain of their past actions loomed too large for her to forgive. She found it impossible to face them, let alone find a way to forgive them for the pain they had caused her. Growing up, Sandra had always been a good girl and an obedient child, but just one mistake that she made. Her father didn't look back and disowned her, prioritizing his reputation over his flesh and blood. It echoed the biblical saying, "The rejected stone had become the chief cornerstone." Sandra pondered the haunting question: if she had heeded their advice and terminated her pregnancy, would her life have taken a different turn? These thoughts kept running through her mind. After they departed, Michael approached her, his gaze steady and reassuring. "Take your time," he urged gently, locking eyes with her. "I understand how difficult this is for you. I'll be here whenever you feel ready to confront them and welcome them back into your life." Healing and forgiveness are journeys that require patience. Overwhelmed, she she embraced him tightly, allowing her tears to flow freely until sleep finally claimed her. The end. If you were in Sandra's shoes, would you ever find it in your heart to forgive your parents? I would love to hear your thoughts in the comment section. Thank you for your continued support and for watching my videos. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell for more unexpected twists and captivating content like this. Please leave a comment, like and share with your friends. See you in my next video. Bye.